Good morning, and welcome to Karma Stories. Wishing you a day full of peace, truth, and just enough karma to keep things interesting. Stay with us for real tales where justice always finds its way. The rain hadn't even started when the ground gave its first warning. I was sipping black coffee on my porch, the same way I had for 6 quiet years, when I heard the first deep groan from the canyon walls below. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the usual shifting of dry Texas rock. It was the land exhaling something ancient and angry. From that high ridge above Dry Creek, I had the kind of view most people would pay a fortune for. The kind HOA brochures brag about. The kind they destroy to build 124 luxury homes with panoramic windows and promises they can't keep. By the time the flood came, I had warned them, hell, I had screamed it into microphones, drawn it on maps, etched it into the dirt with my bare hands. But in a town run by HOA boards and pocket-lining politicians, truth is just noise until the houses start floating away. This isn't just a story about negligence. It's about arrogance, about what happens when power silences knowledge, when profits bulldoze memory, and when one man decides not to let it slide this time. What would you have done, standing between a dying canyon and $124 $500,000 dreams? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have stood your ground like I did? Let's begin the story. The ghosts of Dry Creek Canyon were usually quiet company. 6 years since the floodwaters stole Lily. The silence had become a twisted sort of solace for Caleb Morgan. Her laughter still echoed in the rustle of cottonwood leaves, her scent in the damp earth after a rain. His grandfather's log cabin, tucked away from the world, was his sanctuary. His penance, or it had been, until the goddamn jackhammers started. He'd woken to a metallic scream that ripped through the pre-dawn calm, a sound so alien it felt like an invasion. And it was. Peering through the pines, Caleb saw the anemic glow of construction lights. Yellow behemoths clawed at the earth just beyond his property line. A garish sign proclaimed, "Future home of Dry Creek Estates. Luxury living. Naturally. My ass. Dry Creek Estates. The very name was an insult, spat out by the newly formed Homeowners Association. A viper's nest Caleb wanted nothing to do with. And at its head, Veronica Steele. The name alone left a bitter taste, a residue from engineering school rivalries, where her ambition had always been as sharp and unyielding as the steel in her surname. She'd always been gunning for the toppy, and Caleb, with his quiet competence, had apparently been a permanent fixture in her rear-view mirror, a persistent reminder of every B+ she'd ever scored against his A. He grabbed the worn, leather-bound tube containing his grandfather's geological surveys. Old Jedediah Morgan had known this canyon better than the lines on his own hand. He'd mapped every fissure, every fault line in the limestone that formed the canyon's treacherous bones. Down at the nascent construction site, a beefy foreman with a sunburnt neck and an air of besieged authority was yelling at a crew. Caleb strode over, the dust already coating his boots. "Morning," Caleb said, his voice even, though his gut was churning. "You the man in charge?" The foreman, whose name tag read Gus, eyed him with suspicion. "Depends who's asking." Caleb Morgan. "My land borders this project." He unrolled the brittle map on the hood of a dusty pickup. "My granddad surveyed this whole area back in the 50s. This particular stretch, it's sitting on a network of solution cavities. Unstable as a drunk on a unicycle. You start heavy construction, especially with the blasting. I'm guessing you're planning, and you're asking for a sinkhole to swallow your luxury living." Gus squinted at the intricate, hand-drawn lines. "Look, buddy. We got our own geological reports. State of the art. Everything's green lit. State of the art doesn't change the rock underneath." Caleb pressed. "This ain't just about your precious villas. There's a watershed issue. The flood that hit 6 years ago. It wasn't just rain. The ground couldn't take it." Lily's face flashed in his mind, pale and still. A sleek, black SUV crunched to a halt nearby, and out stepped Veronica Steele, dressed in a tailored pantsuit that probably cost more than Caleb's annual property taxes. Her sunglasses were big enough to hide any hint of a soul. Well. Caleb Morgan, Still playing in the dirt. I see. Her voice was smooth, polished, and laced with the same condescending amusement he remembered from their university days. The old rivalry, a simmering ember, flared. She'd always seen his connection to the land, his preference for practical application over theoretical grandstanding, as some kind of folksy weakness. Veronica, he acknowledged, his tone flat. Just trying to prevent a catastrophe. Your crew is about to build on dangerously unstable ground. My grandfather's surveys clearly show, she waved a dismissive hand, the sunlight glinting off an expensive watch. Yes, the legendary Jedediah Morgan's hand-me-down maps. Quaint. But frankly, Caleb, they're outdated. We have current, digitally rendered, and, most importantly, approved surveys. She smirked. Mayor Travis Beckett himself has granted us, let's call them special considerations to expedite this project. Dry Creek needs this development. Progress. Caleb, you wouldn't want to stand in the way of progress, would you? The air crackled. This wasn't just about building codes anymore. Veronica had always been one to leverage connections. Mayor Beckett, a glad-handing charlatan whose pockets were likely as deep as the canyon was supposed to be, was just her type. Rumor had it, Veronica was still trying to scrub off the stink from the West Shore condo project fiasco a few years back. The one where cutting corners on environmental studies led to a partial collapse and a PR nightmare. Dry Creek Estates was clearly her redemption tour, and she wasn't about to let some local yokel with an old map derail her. Progress doesn't mean ignoring proven risks, Veronica, Caleb said, his voice low and steady. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about safety. People died here. Her smile tightened, a mere flexing of facial muscles. Tragic, yes, but hardly relevant to this state-of-the-art development. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a schedule to keep. Gus, make sure Mr. Morgan understands that this is private property. He's not to interfere. Gus, now emboldened by his boss, puffed out his chest. You heard the lady. Best you move along, sir? Caleb rolled up the map, his knuckles white. This isn't over. Veronica, oh, I'm counting on it. She purred, turning back to her SUV. A little resistance adds to the narrative. Don't you think? He stood there, watching the dust settle. The thrum of the machinery, a dull ache in his chest. Interference, that's what she called it. He remembered his grandfather, decades ago, standing before the town council of that era, presenting these same maps, warning them about the folly of unchecked development near the floodplain. They'd patted him on the head, called him an old-timer resistant to change, and rubber-stamped a smaller, thankfully less ambitious, project that had still contributed to drainage problems down the line. The precedent of dismissal was deeply, frustratingly etched into Dry Creek's history. A week later, the official envelope arrived, not by mail, but hand-delivered by a smirking courier who looked like he wrestled bears for a hobby. It was a cease and desist, followed by a summons. The Dry Creek Estates HOA, plaintiff, versus Caleb Morgan, defendant. The charge, willful obstruction of community development and malicious interference with lawful enterprise. They were suing him for trying to prevent them from building a monument to their own greed on land that was practically begging to swallow them whole. Caleb almost laughed. Malicious interference. He looked around the cabin, at the photos of Lily, at his grandfather's worn tools hanging by the hearth. This wasn't malice. This was memory. This was a promise. He picked up the phone. There was an environmental lawyer in Austin, a firebrand named Elena Ramirez, who owed him a favor. It was time to call it in. Veronica wanted a fight. She was about to get one that no special consideration from the mayor could smooth over. The ghosts of Dry Creek were stirring, and this time, they wouldn't be so quiet. The lawsuit papers felt like a declaration of war, and Caleb wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when the battlefield was his own backyard, and the enemy was a soulless corporation disguised as a community. Elena Ramirez, his lawyer, had a voice like gravel and a mind like a steel trap. So, Steele and her HOA cronies think they can bully you with a slap suit. she'd rasped over the phone. Cute. Let's give them something real to worry about. First on Elena's checklist, allies and ammunition. That led Caleb to Jenna Holt, an investigative reporter for the Crosswind Chronicle, whose byline had become synonymous with exposing the dirty underbelly of rapid development in Central Texas. They met at a greasy spoon diner halfway between Dry Creek and Austin, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. So, Veronica Steele is trying to pave paradise and put up a parking lot. More or less, Jenna asked, her pen poised over a notepad. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing. Caleb slid his grandfather's map across the table, next to the HOA's glossy and clearly sanitized promotional brochure for Dry Creek Estates, more like building a luxury death trap on a sponge cake foundation. My grandfather warned the county about this land decades ago. They ignored him. Now Steele's got Mayor Beckett in her pocket, greasing the wheels. Jenna's eyebrows shot up. Beckett. That figures. He's got his fingerprints all over the new zoning variances that are letting developers chew up the hill country. What else you got? Working on it, Caleb said. But Steele isn't just ignoring warnings. She's actively suppressing them. That led him to Dr. Rachel Kim, an environmental engineer with a sterling reputation and a simmering resentment. She'd been part of the initial assessment team for the Dry Creek project, contracted by the county before Steele's HOA and their preferred consultants had taken over. They buried my report, Dr. Kim told him, her office crammed with geological charts and soil sample bags. She was precise, professional, and pissed off. My findings were unequivocal. The proposed density of 124 units was reckless. The karst topography, the groundwater vulnerability. I recommended a significantly scaled-back project, with extensive reinforcement and a wider buffer zone from the creek. They brought in Sterling Consulting, a notorious rubber stamp operation, who, surprise, surprise, found no significant issues. Caleb felt a grim satisfaction. Would you be willing to testify to that? Dr. Kim's lips thinned. Steele's lawyers tried to discredit me then, hinted I was an alarmist. But yes, what they're doing is unconscionable. She then offered a hesitant olive branch. I have a former colleague, someone who used to work at the architectural firm that did the original designs for Steele, back when it was a more modest proposal. He was disgusted by the later revisions. He might have something. A few days later, a discreetly delivered flash drive landed in Caleb's mailbox. It contained the original blueprints for Dry Creek Estates, a plan for 54 sustainable, thoughtfully placed cabins, a far cry from the 124 sprawling mini-mansions currently being hammered into the fragile landscape. Meanwhile, Veronica Steele wasn't playing patty cake. Crude. Professionally printed signs appeared along the public road bordering Caleb's property. Warning. Adjacent property non-compliant. Enter at own risk. Then the whispers started, insidious and targeted. A new resident in the first phase of Dry Creek Estates, one Mrs. Henderson, who seemed to spend an unnatural amount of time gossiping at the new community mailbox, began spreading a tale about Caleb being a disgraced engineer from Arizona who'd mispredicted a flash flood and cost a whole town their water supply. Pure, unadulterated bullshit. But mudsticks, they're trying to paint you as a crackpot. A pariah, Elena said during their next call. Standard playbook. Caleb, however, wasn't just relying on others. He still had his engineering brain. He MacGyvered a series of simple, solar-powered hydrological sensors, piezometers, essentially, and carefully installed them along the perimeter of his land, near the construction zone. Within a week, the data was undeniable. Groundwater levels were fluctuating wildly, showing a distinct upward trend directly correlated with the excavation and foundation work. The earth was literally getting waterlogged. His clandestine monitoring paid off in another way. He'd noticed one of the HOA residents, a man often walking a golden retriever near the boundary, looking increasingly worried. One evening, the man, Marcus Bell, approached him. Mr. Morgan. Marcus seemed nervous, his gaze darting towards the construction site. My daughter, Chloe, just moved into Villa 89. That's one of the ones closest to the creek. He lowered his voice. There's talk, adjustments to the plan. Things that weren't on the original layout they showed us buyers. They moved some utility lines. Regraded areas they said they wouldn't touch. No new permits filed. Either. Caleb listened, his senses on high alert. What kind of adjustments? I overheard one of the foremen talking about unforeseen bedrock issues and creative rerouting. Then I saw an email. They're trying to keep it quiet. Marcus pulled a folded printout from his pocket. It was an internal HOA email discussing minor deviations to maximize lot usage. Then he handed Caleb another, more damning document. A map. One was clearly labeled for county submission, showing 54 units. The other, an internal draft, detailed the crammed 124-unit layout. They sold us on a dream. Mr. Morgan, now I'm worried it's going to be a nightmare for Chloe. This was gold. Falsified plans, unpermitted changes. The increase from 54 to 124 units without going back through the proper channels. Just as Caleb and Elena were strategizing how to deploy this new arsenal, the HOA launched its counteroffensive. Full-page ads appeared in the Crosswind Chronicle. Jenna Holt, thankfully, was on a different beat that week, featuring a grainy, out-of-context photo of Caleb near the construction fence, his expression grim. The headline screamed, "Local extremist threatens progress. Is Dry Creek safe?" They'd hired a slick PR firm, the kind that specialized in reputation management, by way of character assassination. Then came the knockout attempt, a revised property tax assessment for Caleb's modest cabin. It had tripled. The justification, increased land value due to proximity to luxury development. The irony was so thick, Caleb could have choked on it. They were using their destructive project to price him out of his grandfather's legacy. They're trying to bleed you dry, Caleb. Elena stated, her voice tight with anger. Force you to sell, make you disappear before this goes to court. Caleb looked out at the canyon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. The jackhammers were silent for the day, but the damage was done. The scar on the land growing wider. Disappear. Not a chance. Veronica Steele had underestimated him. She saw an isolated man, a relic of a bygone era. She didn't see the son of the canyon, the engineer with a deep well of resolve, or the widower who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Let them try, Caleb said, a cold fire in his eyes. They've just given us more fuel. He picked up the hydrological data, the falsified maps, Marcus Bell's trembling testimony. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to show Veronica Steele what real interference looked like. The sky over Dry Creek Canyon had been a bruised purple for 3 days straight. The rain a relentless, percussive assault. It wasn't just falling, it was being driven. A horizontal barrage that turned the familiar landscape into a shimmering, distorted watercolor. Caleb, clad in dripping rain gear, was less concerned about the cabin's leaky roof than the arrogant stupidity unfolding at Dry Creek Estates. His hydrological sensors weren't just fluctuating anymore. They were screaming. He'd spent the last sleepless night hunched over his grandfather's meticulous weather logs, comparing them with the current deluge. The pattern was chillingly familiar. A slow-moving front, saturated Gulf air, a particular barometric pressure drop. It was a carbon copy of the conditions that had preceded the Great Flood of 43, the one Jedediah had written about with a grim reverence, the one that had reshaped the canyon and nearly wiped out the original settlement. The HOA's much-touted advanced drainage system, Caleb had discovered through a perilous midnight slog along the overflowing creek, was a joke. Worse, it was actively malevolent. Instead of dispersing water safely, it was channeling a massive overflow directly towards a known sinkhole depression his grandfather had marked with a skull and crossbones on his old survey. The entrance to a significant underground cavern system. They weren't just risking surface flooding. They were pressurizing an underground bomb, threatening to blow the saturated earth upwards from below. They're turning their own development into a goddamn water cannon, aimed at themselves. Caleb spat to Elena over a crackling satellite phone connection. The only thing working reliably. We need to get an emergency injunction. Some kind of stop work order based on immediate peril, Elena urged. Her voice tight. Jenna Holt is ready to run with whatever we give her. But nature and human folly were moving faster than the law. The first crack in Veronica Steele's carefully constructed facade came not from Caleb, but from within her own ranks. A video started circulating among the Dry Creek Estates residents. Shaky cell phone footage from a housewarming party at Villa 37, one of the newly completed units, mid-celebration, with champagne flutes raised. A sickening groan echoed, followed by screams. The camera spun wildly, capturing a jagged crack racing across the brand-new tile floor as one corner of the villa visibly sagged. The owner, a staunch HOA loyalist named Henderson, no relation to the gossiping Mrs. Henderson. Thankfully, though equally insufferable until this point, his face a mask of shock and fury, could be heard roaring that damn Morgan was right. This whole place is a sham. He'd gone from Steele sycophant to Caleb convert in the time it took for his foundation to give way. One down, 123 to go, Veronica. However, doubled down. The HOA hastily convened a press conference at the still intact, if slightly damp, community clubhouse, standing before a backdrop of the Dry Creek Estates logo, looking impeccably unruffled despite the storm. Steele blamed unprecedented weather patterns, deliberately exacerbated by misinformation campaigns led by anti-development extremists. She didn't name Caleb, but she didn't have to. Her eyes, cold and reptilian, stared directly into the news cameras. We assure our residents we have the situation under control. Dry Creek Estates is built to the highest standards. The highest standards of bullshit, Caleb thought, watching the live stream on his laptop, the battery dwindling. Then Marcus Bell called, his voice frantic. Caleb, it's Chloe. Villa Otnanove. The access road is completely washed out. They're cut off, her and two friends. The water's rising around the house. I called the HOA emergency line. They said they can't deploy resources until the storm abates, and that it's probably just minor localized flooding. They wouldn't even call county search and rescue. Minor localized flooding. 3 young women trapped, and Steele's empire was more concerned with PR than people. The restraining order be damned. Caleb was going. Marcus, I know an old trail. Higher up. It'll be treacherous, but it might get us there. Gather anyone you can trust. I'll meet you at the trailhead. He grabbed his emergency pack, checked the charge on his heavy-duty drone, a custom build with thermal imaging he normally used for wildlife tracking, and headed out into the tempest. The wind howled like a banshee, ripping at his clothes. The old trail was a muddy sluice, rocks slick and visibility near zero. He met Marcus and 2 other grim-faced residents, one of whom, ironically, was Mr. Henderson of the recently collapsed Villa 37. His earlier outrage now hardened into a desperate resolve as they fought their way up the ridge. A terrified cry cut through the storm's roar. Further down the slope, near where Villa 70 had been, a section of hillside had given way. A small figure, a child, was clinging to the roots of an upended tree, perilously close to a newly formed torrent. Stay here, Caleb yelled over the din, already deploying his drone. The thermal camera cut through the rain and gloom. He spotted the child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, small and terrified. Another section of the hillside groaned ominously. No time. Guiding the drone with practiced hands, he navigated it close, using its speaker. Hang on, we see you. Don't move. While Henderson, a former Marine, expertly rigged a rope, Caleb used the drone to guide him down the treacherous slope. It was a heart-stopping few minutes, the earth shifting beneath them. But they brought the boy, soaked, shivering, but blessedly unharmed, back to the trail. His parents, it turned out, had been frantically searching for him after a portion of their own villa's retaining wall collapsed. The rescue was a small victory, but Villa 89 was still in peril. They finally reached a vantage point overlooking it. The house was an island, water swirling around its foundations, creeping up the porch steps. Lights flickered inside. Caleb didn't hesitate. Using a spotlight and the drone's loudspeaker, He made contact. Chloe and her friends were terrified, but okay. The immediate danger was the rising water and the integrity of the structure. Just as they were planning their approach, another caravan of SUVs, led by Veronica Steele's black Escalade, pulled up to the main, now impassable, construction entrance far below. A crowd of frantic residents, alerted by the growing chaos and the HOA's blatant inaction, had gathered. Steele, flanked by her private security and a PR flunky, holding an umbrella that was doing little good, was attempting to project calm. Caleb, Marcus, Henderson, and their small, mud-caked rescue party emerged from the woods onto the ridge above them. The rescued child now safely with his tearful mother who had joined the desperate homeowners. All eyes turned upwards. "Steele!" Caleb's voice, amplified by a small megaphone he'd brought, boomed down. "Your highest standards are drowning people. Villa 89 is about to go. We're going in to get them." Veronica's face was a frozen mask of fury. "Morgan, you're violating a court order. This is a restricted area. My team has it under control. Your team is sipping lattes while people are trapped." Henderson bellowed, his voice raw. Suddenly, a sound like a cannon shot cracked through the air. Not thunder, a giant, ancient oak tree, its roots undermined by the relentless water, toppled with agonizing slowness, crashing down perilously close to the pristine, brightly lit model home that served as Steele's sales office. Screams erupted from the crowd. Panic. The earth itself was rendering its verdict on Dry Creek Estates, and Caleb Morgan was right in the middle of it, ready to deliver his own. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The crash of the ancient oak was like the period at the end of God's own sentence. It landed with a ground-shaking thud mere yards from the Dry Creek Estates model home, sending a shower of debris and terrified screams through the already panicked crowd of homeowners. Veronica Steele, for the first time Caleb could recall, looked genuinely aghast. Her mask of composure shattered like the nearby display window. Her private security guards, suddenly looking less like imposing protectors and more like overdressed mall cops, nervously herded her towards the relative safety of the clubhouse. But safety was an illusion. Dry Creek Canyon was no longer offering, as if the falling tree were a signal. The universe decided to pile on. Jenna Holt's expose hit the Crosswind Chronicles website with the force of a digital bombshell. The headline screamed, "Dry Creek Deceit, Mayor Beckett. Steel development in collusion scandal. Permits forged. Experts faked." The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, meticulously detailing the backroom deals. The campaign contributions funneled from shell corporations linked to Steele, the sterling consulting charlatans who'd rubber-stamped the geological reports, one of whom, Jenna discovered, was a disgraced former theme park designer, not an engineer. The special considerations Veronica had boasted about were laid bare as outright corruption. Almost simultaneously, social media feeds exploded. Someone, a disgruntled HOA employee, perhaps, or a resident finally pushed too far, had live-streamed from an office window in the HOA's temporary headquarters. The shaky footage showed Gregory Marks, Steele's impeccably tailored lawyer, frantically stuffing documents into a shredder, his face pale and sweaty. The video, #Shredgate and Dry Creek Disaster, was racking up views faster than the rising floodwaters. The political fallout was swift. At an emergency town council meeting hastily convened via Zoom, because no one could physically get there, one Councilman Davis, who had been a vocal proponent of the Dry Creek Estates project and had consistently voted down motions for further environmental impact studies, found himself ambushed. An irate resident, armed with leaked bank statements Jenna Holt's team had likely unearthed, publicly accused him of accepting substantial consulting fees from Steele's primary construction contractor. Davis's sputtering denials were drowned out by a chorus of angry shouts from other attendees on the call. The tide was turning, fast and furious. Back at the chaotic scene near the model home, Caleb watched the pandemonium. He should have felt pure triumph. Instead, a strange hollowness echoed in his chest. He'd gotten the women out of Villa 89 just before the access path completely gave way. A dangerous rope and harness operation in the screaming wind. They were safe, huddled with other shaken residents in the sturdier, older community hall down the main road, well away from the immediate danger zone. His gaze fell on the model home. Through the shattered window, he saw a flicker of movement. Veronica. She hadn't retreated to the clubhouse with her goons. She was standing alone, staring blankly at a diorama of the Dry Creek estates that was now half covered in mud and leaves. She looked small, defeated. Against his better judgment, an instinct he couldn't quite name. Pity, perhaps, or just a morbid curiosity to see the queen deposed in her crumbling castle, pulled him towards the structure. The ground was increasingly unstable, water pooling everywhere. Steel, he yelled, pushing open the damaged door. What the hell are you still doing here? This whole area is about to go. She turned slowly, her expensive suit splattered with mud, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were vacant. It was supposed to be perfect, she whispered, more to the ruined diorama than to him. My comeback. Your comeback is currently trying to become a submarine. Veronica, we need to get out. As he spoke, his eyes landed on a small, silver-framed photograph lying face down on a nearby overturned end table, dislodged by the tree's impact. He picked it up. It was an old photo, slightly faded. A younger Veronica, almost unrecognizable with a softer expression, standing beside a man who looked a lot like her, and an older woman in a hospital bed. All three were smiling, but there was a fragility in the younger Veronica's eyes, a hint of past sorrow. For a fleeting second, he saw not the ruthless developer, but a ghost of someone else, someone who might have once known loss. He didn't say anything, just pocketed the photo. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was just a reminder that even monsters had mothers. The decision was taken out of their hands. A deep, guttural roar echoed from upstream, a sound that vibrated through Caleb's bones. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of the earth surrendering. That's it, he said, grabbing a stunned Veronica's arm. Move. Now? They stumbled out of the model home just as the ground beneath Villa 1, the one closest to the creek and the compromised drainage outflow, seemed to liquefy. With a sickening lurch, the brand new structure tilted, groaned, and then began to slide. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed, towards the raging torrent of Dry Creek. Then Villa 2 followed, and 3, like a horrifying set of dominoes. The houses of Dry Creek estates, built on lies and unstable ground, began to collapse. Foundations cracked, walls buckled, roofs caved in. The luxury living disintegrated into a maelstrom of splintered wood, twisted metal, and shattered dreams, all swept away by the unforgiving current. The underground cavern system, oversaturated and pressurized by steel's advanced drainage, had clearly ruptured, turning the entire development site into a quicksand pit. Caleb pulled Veronica along, scrambling towards higher ground, joining the stunned, horrified homeowners who were witnessing their investments, their new lives, vanish into the muddy abyss. The rain kept falling, washing away the evidence of arrogance and greed. He looked back at the canyon, his grandfather's warnings, dismissed as the ramblings of an old man, had become a devastating prophecy. The land had spoken, and its voice was one of utter, catastrophic ruin. There was no satisfaction in being right. Not like this, just a profound, weary sorrow, and the bitter taste of a victory that felt as hollow as the collapsing homes disappearing into the churning water. The ghosts of Dry Creek had finally had their say. The Dry Creek debacle wasn't just a local disaster, it became a national cautionary tale. Once the waters receded, leaving behind a landscape of obscene destruction, a graveyard of shattered lumber, twisted rebar, and the ghostly outlines of where 124 luxury villas had briefly stood. The feds moved in. You can ignore a lone canyon crank like me. You can even strong-arm a local government. But when tens of millions in insured property self-immolates on live television due to what looked suspiciously like criminal negligence and corruption, Washington tends to take notice. Veronica Steele, stripped of her power suits and her steely veneer, found herself facing a 5-count federal indictment. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, violations of the Clean Water Act, and, my personal favorite, aggravated stupidity, okay? That last one I might have editorialized, but the others were real enough. Her slick lawyer, Gregory Marks, the one caught in his impromptu shredding party, sang like a canary to the grand jury in exchange for a lighter sentence. He'd kept meticulous records, apparently, of every shady deal, every shortcut, every bribe. A rat, but a well-organized one, Mayor Travis Beckett. His political aspirations drowned in the Dry Creek mud, resigned in disgrace before he could be impeached. A slew of town planning officials, the ones who'd conveniently overlooked my grandfather's warnings and Dr. Kim's report, found themselves unceremoniously fired, their careers ending not with a bang, but with a pink slip. The entire planning department was gutted and rebuilt, this time with an oversight committee that actually included, imagine this, qualified engineers and environmental scientists, the displaced residents of Dry Creek Estates. Their dreams turned to debris, launched a massive class-action lawsuit. Elena Ramirez, now something of a folk hero in legal circles, led the charge. They won the construction company, its reputation in tatters, and what was left of the Dry Creek Estates, HOA, basically an insolvent shell corporation, were forced to pay out substantial compensation. It wouldn't bring back their homes or erase the trauma, but it was a measure of justice. Marcus Bell and his daughter Chloe, along with Mr. Henderson, who became an unlikely but vocal advocate for responsible development, were among the first to testify. In the quiet that followed the storm of lawsuits and indictments, strange things began to happen. I got a call from the newly appointed county commissioner, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. They wanted me to serve as an ad hoc environmental consultant for the county, particularly regarding development in geologically sensitive areas. The irony wasn't lost on me, my grandfather, Jedediah Morgan, the man they dismissed for decades, was posthumously honored by the Texas Geological Society. They even named a research grant after him for contributions to understanding karst topography. About damn time. The ruined land itself became the subject of much debate. Developers, like vultures scenting a carcass, started circling again, proposing remediation and scaled-back, eco-friendly projects. But the public outcry, fueled by Jenna Holt's continued reporting and the sheer visual horror of what had happened, was too strong. Instead, in a move that restored a sliver of my faith in bureaucracy, the state, with federal support, designated the entire Dry Creek Canyon area a protected preserve. They even asked for my input on the name. It's now officially the Morgan Hammond Conservation Preserve. Hammond was Lily's maiden name. It felt right. A place of so much loss. Now a sanctuary dedicated to her memory. A place where nature could heal, and where no one would ever again try to build a monument to greed on its fragile bones. The photo I'd found of Veronica in the model home, I gave it to Elena. During Steele's sentencing hearing, she got 7 years in a federal facility, a lighter sentence than many wanted, but enough to ensure she wouldn't be developing anything more complex than a new recipe for prison hooch for a good while. Elena read a victim impact statement that wasn't about financial loss, but about the arrogance of power and the betrayal of trust. She never mentioned the photo, but I saw her glance at Veronica, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Maybe she saw that ghost of a different woman too, or maybe she just saw a criminal finally getting her due. To further honor Lily, and to try and wring some good from the tragedy, I used some of the settlement money I eventually received for damages to my property and, hilariously, emotional distress caused by the HOA's harassment to establish the Lily Morgan Scholarship Fund. It supports students pursuing degrees in environmental science, geology, and disaster management. The kind of people who might actually listen when the earth whispers a warning. Jenna Holt, true to her tenacious spirit, wrote a book. The Dry Creek Collapse, Anatomy of a Man-Made Disaster, became a bestseller. It's now required reading in several engineering ethics courses and at a few prestigious law schools. A textbook example of how greed, corruption, and the willful ignorance of scientific reality can lead to catastrophe. Jenna sends me a signed copy every year, with a note. Last year said, "Still fighting the good fight." Caleb, they haven't learned all the lessons yet. She's right, of course. The jackhammers are silent now in Dry Creek Canyon. The only sounds are the wind in the pines, the chatter of the creek which is slowly finding its old course, and the occasional call of a hawk. My cabin still stands, a stubborn sentinel on the edge of the preserve. I put up a new sign on the edge of my land, where the old HOA non-compliant sign used to be. It's carved from a solid piece of oak, salvaged from a tree that fell naturally, not one felled by disaster. It reads, "We don't oppose development, only the repetition of preventable deaths. Listen to the land. It always tells the truth, in memory of those whose warnings were ignored, and those who paid the price." It's not as catchy as luxury living, naturally, but I think it's a damn sight more honest. The ghosts of Dry Creek are quieter now. Maybe, finally, they can rest. And maybe, just maybe, so can I. What would you have done, standing between a dying canyon and 124 $500,000 promises? Would you have walked away or stood your ground? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What part of this story hits you hardest? The arrogance, the silence, the moment the land finally answered back. And if you enjoy stories where HOA drama meets real-world stakes where truth, greed, and justice collide out in the dust, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next.